My foxwoman roommate has a broken heart now. She's learning to smile once more. Subscribe, please. He never expected his life to change so suddenly. One ordinary evening, after a long day of work, he returned to his small, quiet apartment. The kind of apartment that was perfect for one person: a little kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch, and a bedroom that faced the fading sunlight. It wasn't luxurious or fancy, but it was his place, a space where he could think, rest, and breathe. He liked the solitude, the quiet, the freedom of doing what he wanted without worrying about anyone else. Yet that evening, he found that his life was about to shift in ways he could never have imagined. He had been expecting a roommate for the first time in years, not because he wanted one exactly, but because his apartment was big enough for two. The rent was high enough that having someone share it would make life easier. Still, he wasn't prepared for the kind of person who would walk through that door. When she arrived, he realized immediately that she was unlike anyone he had ever met before. She was a foxwoman, though not in the mythical sense that some might imagine. Her ears were slightly pointed, her movements graceful, and there was a subtle wildness in her golden brown eyes. It made her look like she belonged more to the forest than the city streets. Yet despite her unusual appearance, it was the sadness she carried that struck him the most. She moved quietly, carefully, as though every step might disturb a fragile world inside her. There was a hesitation in the way she looked around the apartment, a softness in her voice when she introduced herself. It was as if she had been walking through life expecting the ground to crumble beneath her at any moment. From the first day, it was clear that she carried a heavy burden. She didn't talk much about her past, and he didn't press. Instead, he observed quietly, trying to understand the rhythms of her life without invading her space. She had a tendency to sit by the window, gazing outside as if she were watching memories play in the streets below. Sometimes she would flinch at sudden sounds or pull her coat tighter around her, as if shielding herself from something invisible. Her silence was not emptiness. It was a language of its own, telling him more about her than words ever could. He noticed small habits that spoke volumes about her life. She rarely ate much, preferring simple meals, and she often stayed up late into the night, scribbling in a notebook with a pencil that seemed worn down from use. There were moments when her eyes grew distant, as though she were somewhere else entirely, lost in thoughts he could not reach. And yet, she was polite, careful not to disturb him, often whispering a thank you or a sorry for things that didn't need apologies. He realized that she was trying to protect herself from being a burden, to live in a way that kept her pain private, unseen by others. In those first few days, he tried to find ways to make her feel comfortable. He didn't push for conversation or companionship. Instead, he left little gestures: a cup of tea waiting for her when she returned from the market, a blanket folded neatly on the couch, a book he thought she might enjoy left on the table. He didn't expect gratitude, and most of the time, she didn't offer it. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to see small signs that she noticed. A soft glance, a brief smile, a slightly lighter step when she moved around the apartment. He also realized that her pain was more than just loneliness. There was a heartbreak in her eyes that spoke of betrayal, of trust broken in ways that cut deep. He didn't know the details, and she didn't volunteer them. But sometimes she would mutter to herself in the quiet hours of the night, fragments of sentences that made him wince. Words like "left me, couldn't stay," and "I trusted you" were whispered almost like prayers, spoken only for herself. He could sense that someone had hurt her profoundly. Someone she had opened her heart to, only to be abandoned when she needed them most. It was a story written in the lines of her face, in the way she carried herself, in the small, careful ways she tried to disappear from attention. At first, he didn't know how to approach her. He was used to solving problems, to taking action, but this was different. This was not a puzzle with pieces to arrange neatly. It was a living, breathing person with layers of pain, and every wrong word could push her further away. So he chose patience. He learned to give her space, to allow her to set the pace of any interaction. He spoke only when she seemed ready, shared meals only when she agreed, and never assumed that she wanted companionship simply because they shared a roof. Despite her guarded nature, there were moments of vulnerability that broke through. He would catch her humming softly to herself while cleaning, or see her fingers lingering over a photograph she kept tucked in her notebook. Sometimes she would laugh quietly at something on television, or pause to watch a bird outside the window, and for a fleeting moment, the weight on her shoulders seemed lighter. He treasured those moments because they were rare, and he understood that trust was earned in tiny increments. It's not grand gestures. It wasn't always easy. There were days when her sadness seemed to fill the apartment, making even the air feel heavy. She would retreat into herself, her tail curling tightly around her legs, ears pinned back as if to block out the world. On those days, he would sit quietly in his chair, reading or listening to music, giving her the space she needed, without asking for anything in return. He learned to accept the quiet, to let it be, understanding that healing did not follow a schedule. Sometimes, late at night, he would find her standing at the window, looking out at the city lights, and he wondered what she was thinking. Was she remembering the past, or imagining a future where she could be safe again? He never asked. Instead, he learned to appreciate her presence, even in silence, knowing that she was slowly becoming a part of his life in a way that words could not capture. By the end of that first week, he realized something important. Her broken heart did not define her. It was a part of her story, yes, but it was not the whole story. There was strength in her gentleness, courage in her quiet resilience, and beauty in the small ways she allowed herself to exist in the world despite the pain. He didn't know how the next days would unfold, or whether she would ever fully trust him. But he felt a quiet hope that together, they might find a rhythm of life that allowed her to smile again, even if just a little. He understood now that sharing his apartment with her was not about convenience or finances. It was about giving her a space where she could be herself, where she could feel safe, and where she could begin to heal without pressure or judgment. It was about learning to live alongside someone who had been hurt deeply, discovering the patience, kindness, and empathy that he never knew he could offer. And so, life went on. They lived together in the same small apartment. Two people carrying their own stories and burdens, learning to exist in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. She still kept much of her pain hidden, and he still gave her space, but slowly, imperceptibly, began to feel the weight lift just a little. She began to trust that not everyone would hurt her, that not every gesture had an ulterior motive. And though the road ahead was long, he could see the first glimmers of something important, the possibility of a smile, the faintest hint that her heart might learn to heal once more by the time the first month passed. Small changes were noticeable. She moved with less caution. Her gaze lingered a little longer on him during conversations, and she occasionally laughed aloud at a joke he made. Those were small victories, invisible to the world, but monumental to him. It was a reminder that healing is never instant, that it is measured in quiet moments, in tiny acts of connection, in patience and understanding. In the end, he realized that sharing his apartment with her was not just about helping her, it was about both of them learning to live differently. She was learning to open her heart again, even a little, and he was learning the art of quiet compassion. The power of simply being there for someone without expectation or demand. That first part of their story, the beginning of their shared life, was not dramatic or extraordinary. It was simple, ordinary, and yet it was the foundation upon which everything else would grow. Trust, friendship, and perhaps in time, the joy of a smile that came from a heart learning to beat again. As the days turned into weeks, he began to understand that her sadness was deeper than it first appeared. There were moments when her quiet composure would slip, and a shadow of the past would appear in her eyes. He had noticed that she sometimes stared at nothing in particular, as if memories she wished she could forget were playing before her. It wasn't anger or frustration. There was no rage. Only a kind of quiet sorrow, the kind that weighs on someone for years and makes even the simplest things feel heavy. He did not ask questions immediately. He had learned that rushing her to talk about her pain would only push her further away. Instead, he observed, patiently waiting for moments when she might choose to share pieces of her story herself. It was clear to him that her past had left deep marks. Some nights, he would hear her soft sighs or catch her whispering to herself, almost as if speaking to the memories themselves. Words like, "I thought you would stay, and why did you leave me?" were repeated so quietly that he could barely hear them. But they were enough for him to understand that someone she had trusted had hurt her profoundly. She carried that hurt like a cloak, wearing it every day, even when the rest of the world could not see. It made her cautious, almost fragile, but also resilient in ways he found remarkable. To continue living, continuing to exist in a world that had already caused her pain, took courage. He remembered one particular evening when she returned from outside, holding her coat tightly and walking more slowly than usual. He had cooked a simple dinner pasta with tomato sauce and had left a cup of warm tea on the table for her. She noticed it immediately, but instead of the usual quiet nod or polite thank you, she just stood there for a moment, looking at him with an expression that was hard to read. Then, without a word, she sank onto the chair across from him, her eyes lowered, her shoulders tense. It was one of those rare glimpses into her inner world. She seemed lost, as if the weight of the day and the weight of her past had collided all at once. He sat down silently, not pressing her, simply placing his hands on the table. The quiet was not uncomfortable. He had learned that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. Slowly, she lifted her gaze and gave him a small, tentative smile. It wasn't a full smile, her lips barely curved, and there was still sadness in her eyes, but it was a signal, however small, that she trusted him enough to be seen in her vulnerable state. That night, he realized that healing was not something that could be rushed. It was measured in tiny victories, in moments like these where a person allowed themselves to be noticed, to be present, to be accepted without judgment. Over time, he began to see patterns in her behavior. Certain triggers would cause her to withdraw a phone call that reminded her of someone from her past. A song that brought back memories, even a phrase or a gesture could make her flinch. He learned to be careful with words, to avoid sudden movements that might startle her, to respect her need for space when she needed it. It was not always easy. He wanted to help, to reach out, to ease her pain immediately, but he understood that true support was quiet, patient and respectful of boundaries. One day, he found her sitting on the floor near the window, her knees pulled up to her chest, looking more vulnerable than ever. She was holding a small photograph in her hand, staring at it with a mixture of longing and sorrow. He did not speak immediately. He knew that some moments were not meant for words. Instead, he brought over a small blanket, draped it gently over her shoulders, sat nearby without touching her, without making her feel pressured. She looked at him briefly, then back at the photograph. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. Her breathing seemed to ease. That was the first time he realized just how heavy the weight of her past had been. He did not need to know every detail of her heartbreak. He only needed to understand that someone had broken her trust and that she had been left to carry the pain alone. In that moment, he promised himself that he would not add to her burden. He would be the quiet presence she needed, someone she could rely on without fear of disappointment or betrayal. Their routine began to settle into a comforting rhythm. Mornings were quiet, filled with the gentle sounds of the city outside and the occasional aroma of coffee brewing. She would prepare her breakfast, usually something simple, while he read the news or worked on small projects around the apartment. Some days, she would hum softly while cooking, a habit he had noticed but never commented on. Other days, she would simply sit by the window, her gaze distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere, and he would sit nearby, reading or doing his own tasks. Content simply to share the space with her. He noticed that she began to respond, in small ways, to the kindnesses he offered. A cup of tea left on the table would sometimes come with a faint smile. A blanket draped over her shoulders on a chilly evening would be acknowledged with a soft thank you. And slowly, she began to speak more, though cautiously, about her thoughts and feelings. Not about the deepest wounds, not yet, but small glimpses into her world, what she liked, what scared her, what brought her comfort. Each revelation, no matter how minor, was a step forward. It was not always smooth. There were days when she retreated entirely, locking herself in her room or staying silent for hours. On those days, he would not press, knowing that her need for solitude was part of the healing process. He learned to respect those boundaries, to understand that healing is not linear. There were steps forward, yes, But there were also steps back, moments when the past would feel too heavy to bear. And he stayed present through it all, quietly, patiently, offering support without demanding gratitude or acknowledgement. Slowly, he began to see changes in her demeanor. Her movements became less cautious, her posture more relaxed, her laughter lighter and more frequent. She started to interact more, sometimes joining him for a meal, sometimes sharing a story or an observation about the world outside the window. She began to trust that she could exist in this shared space without fear of being judged, abandoned, or hurt. And each small step she took filled him with quiet pride, a reminder that compassion and patience could make a difference in someone's life, he realized. 2. That her past heartbreak had not erased her spirit. Beneath the sadness, there was still curiosity, still wonder, still the capacity to find joy in small things. He saw it in the way she smiled at a stray cat outside, in the way she laughed softly at a joke on television, in the way her eyes lit up when she discovered a new book or a song she liked. It was subtle, almost hidden, but it was there. And he began to understand that part of his role as her roommate was not just to provide shelter or companionship, but to help her remember that life could still hold moments of beauty and happiness. Sometimes, late at night, he would find her sitting on the balcony, looking at the stars. He would join her quietly, not speaking, simply sharing the silence. And in those moments, he felt a sense of connection that went beyond words. It was not friendship yet, not fully, but it was something important and understanding. A shared space where she could be herself, vulnerable and unguarded. And he could be a steady presence without judgment. In the weeks that followed, he began to notice more smiles, more laughter, more moments where the sadness in her eyes lifted even briefly. It was not a complete healing, not by any measure, but it was progress. Each smile, each soft laugh, each moment of trust was a victory. A sign that she was beginning to open her heart, even cautiously, to the possibility of happiness once more. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Her past would always be a part of her, and moments of pain would resurface from time to time. But he also knew that he could be there for her, quietly, patiently, without trying to fix everything, without expecting immediate results. And that, he realized, was the most important gift he could offer: consistency, understanding, and the knowledge that she was not alone. By the end of this second part of their journey together, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He had come to appreciate the complexity of healing, the courage it took to live after heartbreak, and the power of simply being there for someone who was hurting. She had begun to show small signs of life beyond her sorrow, and he knew that the foundation they were building together could support something beautiful in the future. It was a quiet, slow process filled with small victories, subtle shifts, and tiny moments of joy. But for both of them, it was real, tangible, and meaningful. And as he watched her move through the apartment one evening, humming softly and glancing outside with a hint of wonder in her eyes, he realized that part of the miracle of healing was not in grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but in these simple, ordinary moments, the gentle unfolding of trust, patience, and the courage to hope once again. Life settled into a quiet rhythm between them, a rhythm that was peaceful and steady, yet slowly changing in ways neither of them could have expected. By now, he had learned to notice the subtle shifts in her mood, the tiny signs that told him when she felt safe and when the past had returned to haunt her. But something new was beginning to emerge: small acts of trust, moments where her walls seemed to soften, and little smiles that appeared unprompted. These were not grand gestures, nor were they dramatic revelations. They were gentle, delicate hints that her heart was starting to feel lighter, if only a little dot. It started with the simplest of things. One morning he returned from work to find her in the kitchen, preparing breakfast not only for herself, but also for him. She had made toast and poured coffee, arranging everything neatly on the table. When he noticed, he felt a small warmth in his chest. She looked up at him, cheeks slightly pink, and muttered, "I thought you might be hungry." It was a small gesture, but to him it was monumental. It was an indication that she was beginning to think of someone other than herself, that she was willing to share a part of her life with him. From that day, little moments became more frequent. She would leave small notes, sometimes on the fridge, sometimes on the table. Wishing him a good day or reminding him to take care of himself. Sometimes she would bring home small treats, a pastry from a nearby bakery or a fruit she knew he liked. These gestures were simple, but they carried meaning. They were her way of reaching out, a quiet declaration that she was willing to let someone into her world. Even in small increments, he, in turn, continued to offer quiet support. He never pushed her to talk about the past, never asked for explanations or details she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he focused on creating a sense of normalcy and comfort. He would leave hot tea on the counter, keep the apartment warm on chilly nights, make space for her to relax without feeling rushed or judged. Sometimes he would read near her while she worked on her sketches or notes, sharing the same space without requiring conversation. And sometimes that shared silence spoke more than words ever could. One evening, they found themselves sitting together on the couch watching an old movie. She leaned slightly toward him, resting her head gently on his shoulder. It was such a small gesture, so fleeting, that it could easily have gone unnoticed. But to him, it meant that she trusted him enough to be close, to allow herself to feel safe even in the presence of someone who had only recently entered her life. That night, after she left for her room, he realized that patience and kindness were slowly breaking down the walls around her heart, brick by brick. He also noticed the little ways she began to care for herself, which were perhaps the most telling signs of healing. She started eating more regularly, taking time to prepare meals for herself with care rather than simply grabbing something in a hurry. She began to sleep more consistently, no longer staying awake into the early hours of the morning consumed by restless thoughts. Even small changes like cleaning the apartment or arranging flowers on the windowsill revealed that she was investing in her own well-being again. Each of these steps, though subtle, reflected a growing sense of hope, willingness to reclaim life after heartbreak. One afternoon, he came home to find her standing by the window, watching a group of children playing in the street below. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting a kind of wonder that had been absent before. When he asked what she was thinking, she shrugged lightly, then said, "It's nice to see them happy. I forgot what that felt like." Her words struck him deeply. They were simple, almost casual, yet they revealed a profound truth. She was beginning to remember that joy was possible, that life could offer moments of light even after pain. They started sharing more conversations, too. Not about the deep wounds that still lingered, but about small, everyday things. Favorite foods, memories from childhood, stories about the city. She would sometimes laugh softly, a sound that seemed almost foreign to her before, but now it came naturally. And when she laughed, he laughed too, feeling a quiet joy in the simple act of connection. These conversations, though ordinary on the surface, became bridges between them, weaving trust and companionship to the fabric of their shared life. It was during one rainy evening that he truly saw how much progress she had made. The rain tapped softly against the windows, and she was sitting on the couch, her feet tucked under her, sketching in her notebook. He brought over a blanket and handed it to her, and she smiled, a full, open smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, and for a moment, there was no trace of the sadness that had dominated her expression for so long. That moment, simple as it was, felt like a breakthrough. It reminded him that healing is often quiet, subtle, and cumulative. Rather than dramatic or sudden, the next weeks were filled with similar small victories. She began leaving the apartment doors unlocked when she went out, a gesture that symbolized trust, a willingness to feel safe in her environment. She invited him to join her on walks, something she had previously avoided, and occasionally shared parts of her day without fear of judgment. Each act, no matter how minor, was a sign that she was slowly opening her heart, learning to trust that someone could be reliable, kind, and steady. There were still difficult moments, of course. She would sometimes retreat for hours, consumed by memories or emotions too heavy to bear. On those days, he would respect her space, continuing his own routine but remaining present in the apartment. He learned that supporting someone doesn't always mean solving their problems or fixing their pain. Sometimes it simply means being there, showing consistency and patience. and letting the person know they are not alone. One afternoon, he noticed her watching a bird outside the window, her ears twitching slightly as if listening to the world around her. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, "I forgot how nice this feels." He realized that she was beginning to notice the small joys of life again, things that had been invisible to her when the weight of heartbreak was so heavy. Flowers blooming in the park, the sound of children laughing, the smell of freshly baked bread from the nearby bakery. These little moments were reclaiming a place in her world, slowly chipping away at the sadness that had once dominated it. He began to see a change in her overall energy. She moved more confidently, her posture less guarded, her interactions with the world around her more open. When she spoke, her voice had a warmth that had been missing before, a hint of hope underlying her words. And though she still carried the memory of pain, it no longer seemed to define her. She was learning that life could hold both sorrow and joy, and that it was possible to move forward without forgetting the past. One evening, as they shared tea by the window, she turned to him with a small smile and said, "I didn't think I could feel this lightness again. It's strange, but nice." He felt a quiet relief wash over him. That single statement, so simple, reflected everything he had hoped for. It was proof that healing was occurring, that her heart was learning to feel safe, and that the shared space of their apartment has become a place of comfort rather than a reminder of past pain. Even small routines became meaningful. Cooking together, sharing meals, reading side by side, or simply watching the world outside the window, these ordinary activities had become profound in their simplicity. They were proof that healing often comes not from grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but from the quiet, everyday acts of kindness and consistency. And in witnessing her small steps toward happiness, he found a deeper understanding of human resilience and the power of compassion. One night, he found her laughing softly at a scene in a movie, her tail flicking with amusement. The sound was so rare, so genuine, that he felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't anticipated. She had come a long way since she first arrived, quiet and guarded, carrying her heartbreak like a shadow. Now she was beginning to reclaim joy, one small step at a time. He realized that healing doesn't erase pain, it simply allows space for happiness to return alongside it. By the end of this part of their journey, it was clear that small acts of kindness were making a real difference. She had begun to trust, to open her heart in tiny ways, and to allow herself moments of joy and connection. The apartment, once a simple living space, had become a sanctuary, a place where healing could happen slowly, naturally, and gently. And he understood that the most profound changes often come from the quietest gestures. A cup of tea, a shared smile, a blanket draped over someone's shoulders, or simply sitting together in silence. It was a delicate, patient process, but one that was reshaping both of their lives. She was learning that trust, kindness, and consistent support could help her feel safe again. And he was learning the beauty of patience, of listening with his heart, and of offering care without expectation. Together, they were discovering that life could hold moments of joy even after sorrow, and that healing is not a destination, but a journey, one small, meaningful step at a time. As the days passed, he began to notice a subtle but significant change in her demeanor. The foxwoman, once quiet and hesitant, was beginning to take small steps toward opening her heart not just to him, but to the world around her. The smiles, once rare and fleeting, were becoming more frequent. The laughter, soft and cautious at first, now sounded more natural. He realized that the small acts of kindness they shared, the tea left on the table, the gentle conversations, the quiet companionship, were slowly helping her trust again. But trust was not something that returned easily. The shadows of her past heartbreak were still there, lingering at the edges of her thoughts, ready to return at any moment. He could see it in the way her ears twitched at sudden noises, in the way her eyes sometimes darkened when a memory crossed her mind. And in the moments when she withdrew from him or the outside world, she was still fragile, still careful, still afraid of being hurt. And he understood that if she was ever going to heal completely, she would need time, patience, and reassurance. One afternoon, she came home looking unusually thoughtful. She sat by the window, her tail curled neatly around her legs, her eyes distant. He sat nearby, sipping tea quietly, not wanting to disturb her, yet sensing that she was on the verge of sharing something important. After a few minutes of silence, she finally spoke. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that if I let myself care, I'll just get hurt again." He nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her fear. "It's okay to feel that way," he said softly. "You've been hurt before, and it makes sense to be cautious. But not everyone will hurt you. Some people will stay even when it's hard, even when it's messy. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a fragile light that had been buried under layers of pain. She didn't speak immediately, but she allowed herself to lean slightly closer, a small act that signified trust. It was a delicate step, but an important one. He knew that healing was not about rushing her to feel safe or happy. It was about creating a consistent environment where she could slowly learn to trust, and where her heart could begin to feel secure once more. In the days that followed, she began to share more about herself, though cautiously. She spoke of the people she had trusted in the past, the bonds she had formed, and the heartbreak that had followed. She didn't give every detail. Some memories were too painful, too raw, but she offered glimpses into her world, tiny fragments that revealed both vulnerability and courage. He listened without judgment, without interruption, simply allowing her to express what she had carried silently for so long. And in doing so, he gave her a gift, the reassurance that her story mattered, that her pain was seen and acknowledged. They began spending more time together outside the apartment as well. Short walks in the park, quiet trips to the local market, even brief visits to a nearby cafe became opportunities for her to practice trusting the world again. At first, she was hesitant, frequently glancing around as if expecting something bad to happen. But with each outing, she became a little braver. Her steps grew steadier, her eyes brighter, and her laughter soft and genuine returned. These small adventures, ordinary in their simplicity, were monumental in her journey toward healing. One day, while sitting on a park bench watching the sunlight filter through the trees, she turned to him and said, "I didn't think I could feel safe again." Her voice was soft, almost fragile, yet it carried a weight that touched him deeply. He smiled gently. "You are safe," he reassured her. "You've taken every step at your own pace, and you're learning that not everyone leaves. Not everyone causes pain. You're allowed to trust again." It was a turning point. She began to open up more frequently, sharing thoughts and feelings she had once buried deep inside. She spoke about her dreams, small hopes she had for the future, and even fears she still carried. And as she spoke, he realized that her heart, once closed tightly around sorrow, was slowly unfurling. She was learning that vulnerability did not equal weakness, that caring again did not guarantee heartbreak. At home, their evenings took on a new rhythm. They would cook together, sharing small tasks in the kitchen, laughing over minor mistakes, and appreciating the simple pleasure of companionship. Sometimes they would sit on the couch with mugs of tea, talking quietly about their day, or simply enjoying the comfort of being in each other's presence. These moments, though ordinary, became a foundation for her trust, a reminder that life could be gentle and predictable, and that she could exist in a world where kindness was consistent and reliable. He also noticed the changes in her self-confidence. She started taking better care of herself, not out of obligation, but because she began to feel that she was worth the effort. She would linger a little longer in front of the mirror, smiling at her reflection, brushing her fur carefully, and choosing her clothes thoughtfully. These were small acts, but they reflected a growing sense of self-worth, a sign that she was beginning to reclaim her life and her happiness. One quiet evening, she sat by the window, sketching in her notebook. He watched her for a moment, noticing the focus in her eyes, the gentle curve of her tail as she worked. Without looking up, she said softly, "I think I'm ready to try again, to feel hope." He felt a swell of emotion, joy, relief, and pride, all at once. That simple statement, so fragile and tentative, was a testament to her courage. It showed that she was willing to confront the fear that had kept her heart closed for so long, and that she was ready to allow herself to experience life fully again. Of course, there were still moments of hesitation. She would sometimes retreat into herself, overwhelmed by the memories of her past, and he would simply be there, silently offering support. He had learned that healing was not linear. It had its ups and downs, and patience was essential. She needed to know that even when she faltered, even when fear returned, she would not be abandoned. And he was determined to be that steady presence, offering trust, consistency, and understanding without conditions. Through these experiences, she began to learn that trust could be rebuilt slowly, that not every act of kindness carried hidden motives, and that true friendship and care were possible. She discovered that allowing herself to feel safe, even temporarily, was not a betrayal of her past experiences. Each time she allowed herself to relax, to laugh, or to share a thought, she was reclaiming a part of herself that had been buried under grief. And with each small victory, her smile became more natural, her laughter more confident, and her eyes brighter. One afternoon, while preparing tea together, she suddenly said, "I think I forgot what it felt like to really enjoy life." He looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her voice. "It's okay," he replied gently. "Life can still be beautiful even after the pain. You're learning that now, one step at a time." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips, and for a moment, the apartment was filled with a sense of quiet hope. As the weeks went on, their bond deepened. He learned more about her past, not every detail, but enough to understand the gravity of the pain she had endured. She, in turn, learned to lean on him, to share her thoughts, and to let someone else care for her without fear. Trust was no longer just an idea. It was a living, breathing part of their shared life. She realized that by taking small steps, by allowing herself to be vulnerable in safe spaces, she could experience joy again without being paralyzed by fear. By the end of this phase of their journey, it was clear that she had made remarkable progress. She was learning to face her fears, to open her heart, and to allow herself moments of happiness without guilt or hesitation. Her smiles were no longer rare. They were becoming a part of her daily life, and he knew that while the past would always remain a part of her story, it no longer had the power to control her present or future. This part of their journey was a testament to the quiet strength of the human, or in her case, the foxwoman heart. It showed that healing is possible even after deep heartbreak, and that trust can be rebuilt with patience, understanding, and consistent care. She was learning that life could be gentle, that people could be kind, and that hope was not something to be feared, but something to embrace. Together, they discovered that love and trust do not have to be immediate, dramatic, or forced. They can grow slowly, nurtured by patience, shared experiences, and small acts of kindness. And in this slow, gentle process, she was learning to smile freely once more, not just as a mask for others, but as a reflection of the joy and hope that was returning to her heart. The apartment was quiet that morning, filled only with the soft light of the rising sun and the distant hum of the city outside. She sat by the window, her tail curled loosely around her legs, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she had almost forgotten: peace. It wasn't complete, and the shadows of her past heartbreak still lingered, but it was enough to make her feel alive again. Enough to make her realize that she could smile freely, not because she had to, but because she truly wanted to. He noticed the change immediately. Her movements were more relaxed, her posture less tense, and her golden brown eyes seemed brighter, almost reflective of a hope that had been buried for so long. She turned to him and smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Good morning," she said softly. There was warmth in her voice, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. He returned the greeting, his own smile gentle, knowing that this was a milestone, a moment she had earned through patience, courage, and persistence in the weeks leading up to this morning. Their lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm. They cooked together, shared meals, and spent evenings talking quietly, or watching the world outside the window. She laughed more freely now, sometimes at small jokes, sometimes at the simple absurdities of life. Her smiles were no longer rare or hesitant. They had become a part of her daily existence. The apartment, once a space filled with tension and quiet sorrow, had transformed into a home where laughter and warmth existed. Alongside reflection and healing, it was during these quiet moments that she began to reflect on how far she had come. The heartbreak that had once seemed unbearable was no longer a cage. She realized that her past, while painful, had not destroyed her. It had shaped her, made her stronger, and allowed her to recognize the value of trust and companionship. She had learned that life could still hold joy, that moments of connection were possible, and that she did not have to fear opening her heart again. One afternoon, while preparing tea together, she paused and looked at him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I never thought I would feel like this again," she said softly. "Like I can trust someone. Like I can be happy without worrying that it will end badly." He nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "It's okay," he said gently. "You've taken your time, and you've done it at your own pace. That's what matters. You're learning that it's possible to feel safe again, and you deserve it." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, not of sorrow, but of relief and gratitude. She realized that she had been carrying the weight of her heartbreak alone for far too long. Now, with someone who offered patience, understanding, and quiet support, she could finally begin to release that burden. It was not that the past had disappeared, it never would, but it no longer controlled her. She was free to live, to smile, to experience happiness without fear. Their bond deepened in ways that were subtle yet profound. She began to share more about her thoughts, her dreams, and even the fears she still carried. He listened, offering guidance when appropriate, but mostly providing a steady presence that allowed her to feel secure. She discovered that being vulnerable did not make her weak. It allowed her to connect, to trust, and to feel alive again. And he learned that sometimes the most meaningful support is simply being there, consistently and without expectation. They began to spend more time outside the apartment as well. Walks in the park became longer and more leisurely. Shared meals at nearby cafes became opportunities for conversation and laughter. And visits to the local bookstore became adventures in discovery. Each outing was a small step toward reclaiming her life. A chance to experience the world without the shadow of fear looming over her. And with each experience, she grew stronger, more confident, and more willing to embrace the joys of life. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, she turned to him with a smile that reached her eyes. "I feel different now," she said softly. "Like I can face the world without being afraid all the time." He smiled back, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. "That's because you've learned to trust again," he replied. "You've allowed yourself to heal, step by step. And now you're ready to enjoy life again without letting fear hold you back." It was a milestone in her journey, a clear sign that she had come a long way. She had learned that healing is not instantaneous. It comes gradually, through patience, consistent care, and small victories. She had learned that trust can be rebuilt, that happiness can coexist with memories of pain, and that life is worth living fully, even after heartbreak. These lessons were not just words. They were a living truth she carried in her actions, her expressions, and her interactions with the world around her at home. The changes were evident in small, everyday ways. She laughed freely at jokes, offered help in the kitchen without hesitation, and even initiated conversations about things she enjoyed. She began to notice the beauty in ordinary moments, the way sunlight streamed through the window, the gentle rustle of leaves outside, the aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. These simple pleasures, once overlooked, now held profound meaning for her. She was learning to be present, to appreciate life as it was, and to find joy in moments that others might consider mundane. One morning, while sitting by the window with a cup of tea, she reflected on the person she had been when she first arrived. She remembered the fear, the sadness, and the hesitation that had dominated her life. And she realized how far she had come. The journey had not been easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of retreat, in moments when she wondered if she would ever feel whole again. But now, looking at the world with open eyes and a lighter heart, she understood that healing was possible. It was not about erasing the past, but about learning to live alongside it, stronger and more resilient than before. He noticed these changes as well, and it filled him with quiet satisfaction. He had witnessed her transformation from a foxwoman who had withdrawn from life into someone who smiled freely, trusted, and allowed herself to experience joy. He understood that his role had been simple but important, to provide patience, consistency, and a safe space for her to heal. And in seeing her smile, in hearing her laughter, and in watching her reclaim her life, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, she paused and looked at him with a gentle expression. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being patient, for understanding, and for not giving up on me." He smiled, placing a hand gently on hers. "You did the hard part," he replied. "You allowed yourself to heal. I just walked beside you," she nodded, feeling the truth in his words. It was a shared journey, but the courage, the patience, and the resilience had come from within her. As the weeks went on, she began to embrace life fully once again. She ventured outside more, engaged with people in the neighborhood, and even shared small moments of joy with strangers, a smile, a kind word, or a helping hand. Each act, though small, reflected the growth she had achieved, the trust she had rebuilt, and the strength she had found within herself. She realized that life, despite its challenges, could be beautiful, and that she had the power to create moments of happiness for herself and others. By the end of this final part of their journey, it was clear that a transformation had occurred. She was no longer the hesitant, guarded foxwoman who had arrived carrying the weight of heartbreak. She was someone who had learned to trust, to smile, and to embrace life with open eyes and an open heart. The apartment, once a place of quiet sorrow, had become a sanctuary of warmth, laughter, and hope. And he who had offered patience and understanding had witnessed the remarkable power of healing and compassion. The sun set one evening, casting a golden glow across the room. She sat by the window, her tail flicking gently, a smile on her face that was both serene and radiant. He joined her, and for a long moment, they simply watched the world outside, sharing the quiet comfort of companionship. She had learned that healing does not erase the past, but it allows life to move forward, to embrace joy, and to open the heart once more. And in that shared silence, both of them understood that something precious had been restored: hope, trust, and the ability to smile freely again. It was a journey of patience, understanding, and small, consistent acts of kindness. It was a story of learning to trust after betrayal, to laugh after sadness, and to find light in a world that had once seemed dark. And in the gentle unfolding of her transformation, she discovered the most important truth, that even after heartbreak, a heart can learn to smile again, that sometimes the simplest gestures and the quietest presence can change a life forever.